3 to 5 minutes. To say what?
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Foreign Correspondents Club of Hong Kong. My name is Juliana Liu. I'm the BBC correspondent in Hong Kong and also the current president of the FCC. Now, it's great to see all of you here today. We've got a packed house here to discuss the upcoming 19th Party Congress, which will start in exactly 2 weeks. And that, of course, is expected to influence the political, economic, and policy developments in China and around the world well into the next few decades. We're very pleased to have with us our 4 distinguished panelists who are all contributors to a just published Routledge Handbook of the Chinese Communist Party. Willie Lam next to me, very handily showing off that freshly published copy of the book, which is, by the way, for sale, to my right. Now, Willie Lam, to my right, is the editor of this book. He is also the adjunct professor at the Center for China Studies and the History Department at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. Now, next to him is Dr. Jean-Pierre Cabestan, professor and head of the Department of Government and International Studies at Hong Kong Baptist University. To his right is Dr. Chloe Fossart, director of the Tsinghua University Sino-French Center in Social Sciences in Beijing. She is indeed based in Beijing and joins us specifically to attend this event. Thank you so much for joining us and for braving the flight out of Beijing and back. It must these days take a whole day, if it's even happening. And to her right is Dr. Bill Taylor, associate professor at the Department of Public Policy, City University of Hong Kong. So we're going to kick off the discussion right away, but just a reminder for all you guys, this is a more casual chat, a more casual panel, so if you wish to get more food during some quite dense discussions about the upcoming Party Congress and Chinese politics, please do feel free to get up discreetly and to get more food, and you're very welcome to be getting drinks, many drinks, actually, to help lubricate this upcoming discussion. So that's just my reminder. Now, all of you focus and specialize in different aspects of Chinese policy. Now, before we start talking about what we're expecting to happen during and after the 19th Party Congress, can I just ask all of you to summarize, and the emphasis on summarize. Yes, you're all distinguished lecturers, but we only have about an hour altogether for all of you. So if I can ask you to summarize the impact of President Xi Jinping's administration so far on your areas of expertise. And we do often say that Mr. Xi is the most powerful Chinese leader since Deng Xiaoping. You're welcome to comment on that, whether or not you believe this is true. So let me start with you, Willie Lam.
Oh, thank you. So it's a great privilege to be able to speak at the FCC again. My gratitude to Juliana and also the board for inviting me and my team here. Well, I have been a lifelong student of Xi Jinping. Indeed, well, sorry for this free airtime. I produced a book on Xi Jinping just 2 years ago. The Chinese politics in the era of Xi Jinping. And specifically for this discussion, I have dug up one of the favorite quotations of, well, not Mao Zedong, quotations of Xi Jinping, and that is, we must engage in criticism and self-criticism, 批评与自我批评. So in this spirit, we will tonight engage in a no-holds-barred discussion. There are no sacred cows. Everything is okay. Everything is okay. Even though, of course, we understand that in the Hong Kong context, the Carrie Lam administration would likely pass the Article 23 perhaps next year. I'm sure that even after that happens, the FCC would remain an icon and emblem of press freedom and freedom of expression. So, but before that, I invite you to ask us difficult questions, including Hong Kong independence and so forth. We will also discuss, even though our major focus is on the 19th Party Congress, we will also discuss, if you're interested, the Congress impact on Hong Kong. So finally, my major interest is studying the musical chairs going on in Beijing. So I have compiled a list of the 7-member Politburo Standing Committee, which I might review if you are interested. And and I'm also interested in the China model. Okay, and my argument is that despite his success in the past 5 years in grabbing most powers in the party state and military apparatus, he has become chairman of everything. Xi Jinping has actually broken many instructions and teachings laid down by Deng Xiaoping. And the China model, which has been celebrated in the West, including by respectable Western scholars, the China model is under threat, simply because of what Xi Jinping has done. Okay.
Can I just ask you to very quickly summarize the China model?
Well,
it's economic development without political liberalization, is that the
right,
short?
right,
Okay.
right. According to numerous admirers of the China model, China has been able to achieve this Chinese economic miracle, which of course ended 6-7 years ago, but still the economy is doing reasonably okay. Hinges on actually 2 facts. So the major reason why Beijing and China has been able to develop into a world-sized economy now, second largest economy in the world, without following international norms such as one person, one vote elections, such as freedom of expression and so forth, is due to 2 major factors. One is a meritocratic cadre system. That means the officials are groomed and examined very carefully. So it's only those who are meritocratic, only those who are competent in the professions who can be promoted. But as we'll discuss later on, Xi Jinping has violated this rule because the 19th Party Congress will show that a huge number of his protégés, members of the so-called Xi Jinping faction, which did not exist until 5 years ago, are being promoted to positions on the Central Committee, on the Politburo, on the Politburo Standing Committee. So this destruction of the meritocratic cadre system has dealt a body blow to the China model. The second pillar of the China model is so-called scientific decision-making. So the accolades of this system are saying that, well, the Communist Party, well, they don't need to worry about the opposition parties because most members of the opposition party, if they existed, are now in jail. The leadership doesn't need to worry about fake news, as our good friend in the U.S., Mr. Trump, has to, because that is 120% censorship of the media and so forth. So, therefore, Chinese decision-making can be fast, efficient, and in some cases successful and to the point. However, I will argue that under Xi Jinping, just because he has arrogated most decision-making powers to himself, he has also been violating Deng Xiaoping's very astute advice of the separation of party and government, so that all major decision-making powers are now deposited with a handful of totally non-transparent central leading groups at the apex of the CCP. Decision-making has been very problematic. He has made many mistakes, which, of course, we don't see due to the propaganda, the covered-up by state propaganda. But I would point to a few obvious examples. You know, the way Beijing handled the 2015 stock market crisis, that was a very shabby example of wrong-footed decision-making at the top. And of course, One Belt One Road, which has not gone through thorough consultation in China. Sorry, I've taken more of my time.
Thank you, Dr. Lam. Dr. Kabistan, now, your areas of specialization include party organization and foreign policy. How would you summarize in the last 5 years how those areas have fared under the president?
All right. First of all, thank you to the FCC for putting together this event. And thank you to Willie Lam for having been the initiator of this meeting. Thanks to the publication of a book, which I recommend very much, because that's kind of tour de force, as we say in French, to put together 24 people with the various expertise together in a book which I think tries to better understand the Communist Party. But at the same time, I think we've just made a kind of introduction work to the Communist Party in the sense that it's still a very opaque system, so about which we don't know the whole story.
Well, I must add that most of the so-called state secrets you find in the book come from my good friend here, because
right, everyone buy the book, okay?
Okay, good.
Because he has a direct line to the Zhongnan High Party headquarters.
We share the same line. No, it's also a very nice occasion to have so many friends around. I mean, it's the 19th Party Congress as a virtue is to bring friends together in a way, at least in Hong Kong. Now, there are a lot of things which Willie said, which I agree with, but I have a few disagreements. I have to. First of all, yes, with Xi Jinping, is kind of one-man show. He's the initiator of every decision, every idea. He has taken away power from the other levels of power within the party, within the government, and creating maybe new gridlocks through that concentration of power. What strikes me actually over the last 5 years is how powerful the center is, but how weak. But I have to be careful in what I'm saying, but how weak Xi Jinping is outside of Beijing. And one of the latest illustrations is Su Zhenchai's sacking. How come after 5 years, this guy has been targeted, have been corrupt, bad from the very beginning, even when he was in Jilin, he was already bad. And he's been promoted by Xi Jinping himself, after Zhang Deqiang made a transition for a few months after Bo Xilai was purged. So now they're telling us that this guy is not competent, he's lazy. But why did they keep him in power for 5 years, for God's sake? Because he doesn't control the provinces. Because a lot of things which are going on outside of Beijing, which he doesn't have any clue, he can't change, in spite of all the plenums and all the resolutions approved, in 2013, 2014, 2015. You've got 3 very ambitious plenums and resolutions which lay down a program of economic but also institutional reforms, judicial reform for the next 10 years or so. Not to mention the reform of the military. We'll come back to that later, which started in 2015. So there are a lot of plans, but outside of Beijing, the story can be very, very different. Now, the other thing is, I see, that may differ a bit with Willie here, I see a lot of continuity, actually. Continuity in the sense that I don't think the system has ever been meritocratic. Of course, the people who are promoted are all competent, but they're the same everywhere. It's the same in the US, the same, well, maybe not in the US, but it's the same in France, in Germany. I mean, they all graduate, they all university graduate, they understand economics, but like everywhere, politicians, bureaucrats, and political bureaucrats, as in the case of China, they're divided by interests, they're divided by ideas, they're divided by ambitions. And, when you have to choose between 2 guys, you choose the guy you trust. So that's why the system has always been based on patron-client relations and will remain based on patron-client relations as long as you've got a one-party system. I don't think it's going to change. Now, it's true that he has shaken some of the rules, but at the same time, if you look at his urge to add one layer of ideological truth to the huge Christmas tree of the Communist Party ideology, Xi Jinping's 思想, Xi Jinping's thought, is just doing what his predecessor did before him. Deng Xiaoping, Jiang Zemin, Hu Jintao, they all did that. I mean, he may go a bit further because his name may appear in the party platform, but that's the only difference. Now, where I agree with Willie maybe, I mean, and I disagree with my good friend David Chambaud, I don't think the system, the regime is in danger. I think it's very solid. It's going to stay with us for a long time because they're very clever. They know how to wave, to navigate around the difficulties. They have problems, but they're very good at managing those and mitigating the tensions when they appear. Now, one of the reasons, of course, is that most people in China support the party. The political culture of the mainland Chinese is still dominated by very traditional ideas about giving precedence to security over freedoms, giving precedence to welfare, over diversity and a multi-party system and elections. So they don't care. They live a better life than before and than 5 years ago. But I don't see apart from a small group of activists, I don't see among every Chinese, most Chinese, an interest in politics. As in the past, they just turned their back to politics, and that may go on for a long time, because the party provides the goods, the public goods which the society wants to get. By and large, I think Xi Jinping has, in a way, achieved his goals, even if the growth rate is sort of slowing down. The country is still in much better shape than the rest of the region, of the rest of the world. So now we can add to that as another element of continuity, the use of nationalism. I think Xi Jinping has used nationalism maybe a bit more than his predecessor, but again, since Tiananmen, nationalism has been one of the basic elements of the party's legitimacy, and it has used it very, very well. So I think I will stop here at this stage, and then we come back to this, to what's going to happen in 2 weeks' time, and who's going to be part of the happy few, the 7 lucky guys of the party later.
Thank you so much. It's interesting that you bring up civil society, Dr. Fossard. That is what you specialize in. Can you summarize the last 5 years for civil society in China?
So it's my great honor to be here tonight. Thank you very much for your invitation. And I must say also that I'm very, very honored that Willie asked me to write this chapter on civil society and to be part of this book, because I still remember when I was a student of Chinese politics in Paris, like quite a few years ago. Willie was a journalist at the South China Morning Post, and reading his paper was so inspiring. I remember it was such an event when each time he has a new paper and we were all discussing his article, his ideas. It was really a reference for us. So it's really a great pleasure for me to be part of this book now today. So basically, what I argue in this chapter is that obviously the Xi leadership really tried to regain control over civil society and fight with whatever a democratic, liberal, combative civil society, and to try to format it to create like a people society subservient to the party. And you have actually the same logic of control that apply in different sectors, either on the NGO sectors, the media, religious communities, and of course also the academia. So obviously, I mean, for the NGO sector, you had a lot of crackdown efforts to try to get rid of all the rights defense movement and the right defense oriented NGO and try to create charities. So basically the public good is now represented by charities, and only foreign foreigners can have NGOs, you know. Now, the NGO in China, I mean, the social organization are clearly asked to help the party to perform 3 tasks: regaining control of society, controlling potential disturbing groups, and also relieving the party of its welfare burdens. So the charity law is definitely here to try to change what was before like a quite combative civil society into a more service-oriented, what I call people's society. You have exactly the same logic in the media, either traditional social media sector. During the Wuhan area, social media played a great important role in helping to create new solidarity and more systematic opposition, or at least, yes, opposition to the hegemony of the party, and enable many people to organize without organization, to quote Clay Shirky's sentence. Basically, it meant that if ever social organization could not be sustainable and was prohibited and were shut down, then activists could remain linked together and could still have like a kind of organized action thanks to this social media. But this is not the case anymore. You have like many regulations that has basically replaced what was called the Weiguan, like surrounding gaze, the fact that citizens could to observe, denounce, criticize, organize by what has been called a panoptical control by the Communist Party. And regarding the religious communities, you may know that new regulations are going to be enforced in February next year that basically also seeks to regain control of a field, like a gray area in which many house churches, many religious community could enjoy de facto autonomy by giving much more power to local government in controlling the cult, controlling religion property, controlling the discourse of every religion community and the way they express themselves on the internet, whatever. So you have this common logic about across different sectors, and this is also the case in the academia, of course, where the freedom of speech has been strictly controlled, and where the the professor and researcher are asked to toe the line of the party. Although I think, but we can discuss about it later, I think that the party is much more ambiguous toward academics than it is for a religious group, for example. So it's more ambivalent, and it's not really, it doesn't want to control everything. It doesn't have the mean neither. So basically what I want to say is that there is a clear will of the party, clear attempt to get rid of a kind of gray area, gray zone in which like all these community were operating before, and clarify the rules, legal liabilities, regain control of what was informal. And I will finish on this point. This is not really convincing until now for many reasons. One of the reasons is, and I agree on this point with Jean-Pierre, is that Xi Jinping is not controlling anything and has lots of trouble, especially to have his regulation implemented at a local level. And foot dragging in the administration is very common at the moment. And social actors also are, can resist in many ways and also always find ways to participate differently. So I can elaborate on this later on, but I give the...
Thank you very much. Actually, half our time is already gone, so we've got to pick up the pace. Right. Dr. Taylor, yes, you specialize in the labor situation. in China. So in the last 5 years, we've been used to seeing a lot of protests in China. Are we seeing the same numbers at the moment, or has that changed? Has that situation changed?
Oh, thanks for asking me an easier question. Well, officially we don't know because it's a secret now. So you used to get it from the Ministry of Labour, Human Resources and Social Security. Then you got it from the provincial police forces, and now you can't get it at all. So in the room is CLB, who's been spending a lot of time trying to compute it. And various other academics do tracks, but basically the one that comes from CLB is the most comprehensive and accurate. And it just goes up every year. It keeps on increasing the rate. So when you're going to ask, I was going to say, in the last 5 years, continuity and change. The continuity is conflicts increases, and people say it can't keep on increasing, and yet it still does. And so the stability, you would guess at some point it becomes a crisis, but they still manage to control the situation, and less through direct violence, the use of police. They set up organizations using emergency procedures, slush funds to pay off workers, and various ways in which they try to get the conflicts not resolved but stopped quickly. And that they've become that's become more widespread. It starts off in one place and then gets propagated, as the system is very good at doing, taking good examples and moving them around. But I think the change is a disagreement that I don't think workers, peasants, give a toss about the party. They have no idea about it. Traditionally 10 years ago, your workers would think that there's corruption locally, but Beijing, they're honest guys. So if they can get their case taken to Beijing, they'll get good treatment. And there are examples where people who went to Beijing get compensation, and others who don't. That's more, it's disappearing, and maybe that is associated particularly with the economic problem, because we always, the reading was it had to go up 8%, the economy, to keep the workers happy. Well, it's not. And so the workers are not happy. And I think they are turning to see that the local officials are not providing it for it. And what's supposed to provide it is this organization, the All China Federation, which is a party organization. It's a very party organization as opposed to a state organization. It's very much controlled because they are very concerned about what happened in Poland with Solidarność. They're very concerned with their brand name, supposedly a communist socialist organization which is based on labor. So they have a vulnerability which I think is, they're going to survive, but there's a point at which there's a tipping of conflict increasing, and it just depends how it spreads, how workers from different communities or industries get together. The Honda strikes in 2014 were a really good example of mass panic within the party system to get this stopped and people back to work.
Thank you. Dr. Lam, can I ask you to focus on giving us just a few predictions surrounding announcements at the Congress in 2 weeks? Could you summarize for us? You can read us the list of 7 names that you have, but can you tell us more about them? Can you summarize, and also the Politburo itself, the larger Politburo in terms of balance of power? What are your predictions there?
Oh, thank you. Well, this musical chairs game is very fascinating to watch, even though I have to say as a caveat that, I've been watching the party congresses for about 2 to 3 decades, but since the 16th Party Congress, when Hu Jintao came to power, very unexpected things happened just at the 11th hour, just 1 week before the Party Congress opened in 2002. Similarly, there were very unexpected events happening just on the eve of the 17th and the 18th Party Congress. So, but at this stage, my list consists of, shall we say, three tiers of potential standing committee members. The first tier consists of pretty much shoe-ins. Xi Jinping, of course, Li Keqiang will stay, and Li Keqiang will stay as prime minister, despite speculation that he might be consigned to another job. And then Li Jianshu, who is considered to be a hatchet man for Xi Jinping's closest advisors. He will likely take over the anti-corruption job currently held by Wang Qishan. Wang Qishan I will discuss later, okay, whether Wang Qishan, who is now 69 and 1 year older than the conventional age limit for promotion to the Standing Committee, whether he might stay. Li Jianshu, and then another current Politburo member, Zhao Leji, a former party secretary of Shanxi province, who is in charge of organization. So these four, I think, have at least 80% chance of either promotion or to the Standing Committee or remaining. And then I come to the second tier. That means people who have about, anywhere between 50 to 70% of induction to the Standing Committee. They are the veteran Shanghai Party Secretary Han Zheng, who has been at the top echelon of the Shanghai government for at least 15 years. So he might be promoted to the Standing Committee, and there is also an element of factional balance because, as we agreed, Xi Jinping looks all-powerful from the facade presented by the propaganda machinery, but he's actually significantly less powerful than before. So he has to drive bargains with the other representatives from the other factions. So Han Zheng, who has, of course, professed full fealty to Xi Jinping, he has some links to the Shanghai faction, despite the fact that the Shanghai faction is now being marginalized beyond recognition. And then, together with Han Zheng, is Vice Premier Wang Yang, who perhaps is the most capable member of the Communist Youth League faction, which was led by former President Hu Jintao. So Wang Yang likely will become the chairman of the CPPCC, the top advisory council, and perhaps the executive vice premier. With more or less the same level of chances is Wang Huning, who is already a Politburo member. He is basically Xi Jinping's idea person, Xi Jinping's policy wonk. And everywhere Xi Jinping travels, whether domestically or in other places, he always brings with him Li Jianshu sitting to the one side of him, and to the other side, Wang Huning. However, Wang Huning's position is as his formal position is as the head of the Policy Research Office of the Central Committee, and nobody having that portfolio had ever been promoted to the Politburo, not to mention the Standing Committee. So the fact that he was promoted Politburo 5 years ago was considered to be very exceptional. So whether he will do it this time and at an even higher level is doubtful. But the third tier consists of the so-called rising stars, the members of the sixth generation, a reference to officials born in the 1960s. I would give them, there are only two candidates, because there used to be three, but as Jean-Pierre mentioned, Xun Zhengchai, who was party secretary of Chongqing for 4.5 years, was suddenly removed. So I think this is a sign that Xi Jinping is not very anxious to have so-called young Turks being inducted to the Standing Committee. Xi Jinping, I'm convinced, well, you may challenge me in the Q&A period, but I'm convinced that Xi Jinping, who is a good friend of President Vladimir Putin's, that he will do a Putin in China by staying in power for at least 15 years. That means until the 21st Party Congress in 2027, if not the 22nd Party Congress in 2032. So for Xi Jinping, there is no hurry to anoint potential heir apparents. So these two only sixth-generation candidates. One is Hu Junhua from Guangdong. I think many of us who live in Guangdong are familiar with Hu Junhua, who is just a few hours away from Hong Kong if there were no traffic jams like what happened in the past few days. And then a well-known favorite of Xi Jinping, Chen Min-er, who was recently promoted to the Chongqing position to replace Xun Zhengchai. But I only give them about 25% chance because, as I said, there is no reason why, if Xi Jinping is staying for 15, 20 years, that he should want to make up his mind as to who his apparent might be. One other point about the fact that many of my friends in Beijing have called the 19th Party Congress the coronation of Xi Jinping as emperor for life. One good evidence, apart from his apparent predisposition not to anoint the successor, is that if you look further down the road at the 7th generation, that means officials born in the 1970s. Well, if Xi Jinping were keen in grooming members of the younger generation, he should have already promoted at least a few dozen 7th generation cadres to senior positions. But you might be very surprised to hear that as of today, there are only 4 7th generation officials with the position of vice minister or above. So this was a big contrast to the tenures of Jiang Zemin and Hu Jintao. So when Hu Jintao was around, he was very anxious to groom not only 5th generation successors, but also 6th generation officials. And at the end of Hu Jintao's tenure, towards 2012, there were a few dozen 6th generation officials already in the Central Committee, already occupying positions of vice minister, even ministers, governors, and so forth. So anyway, I probably taken more of my time. So I welcome you, of course, to challenge my list. But finally, I have to say a few words about Wang Qishan. Well, according to most of the information which I can gather from my friends in Beijing, Shanghai, and so forth, his chances for staying are below 50%, And his recent, very surprising meeting with Mr. Steve Bannon, the former chief advisor to Donald Trump, and also the Singapore Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong, have been interpreted as a sign that his political fortunes have suddenly gone up. But my perspective is that these extraordinary meetings seem to have the air of a swan song. You know, this is his swan song meetings with some old friends and so forth. So at this stage, the consensus opinion is still that he will leave, and his position as the top graph buster will be taken over by Li Jianshu. Right.
Thank you, Dr. Lam. I'm conscious of time, so I think there will be a lot of questions for all of you. So I'm just going to ask the panelists to give me 30 seconds to each of these questions. Yes, that's a hard 30 seconds. Dr. Kabistan, assuming this is correct, that this is indeed a coronation of President Xi, what implication does that have for foreign policy, particularly at the moment, policy towards North Korea and the US?
Well,
I think his priority is to empower China, to keep China's external relations stable, to keep the Korean Peninsula stable, at least to keep it away from any war. Now, as you know, both sides, the US and China, are bracing for a meeting, a summit in November. So I don't think anything big is going to happen before that. Now, since Xi Jinping has invested so much political capital in the Belt and Road Initiative, in spite of the criticism which has been rising against this idea and the lack of return on investments along the road, the Belt and the Road, there may be some correction, some adjustment. But I don't think the BRI, as we call it now in China, Belt and Road Initiative, is going to be questioned whatsoever. So I think these Xi Jinping's pet projects will be maintained, even if there are some adjustments on the road. Finally, I think the priority for China will remain the US. Keep stable working relationship with the US in spite of all the differences and tensions between the two big powers.
Thank you very much. I'll let you have actually 2 minutes. Okay, Dr. Fossat, what about civil society? Can we expect more of the same?
What is sure is that Xi Jinping attempt is to try to sever the ties between domestic civil society and international civil society, and try to reduce the diversity within civil society. So the problem is that if you have less ties with the outside, then it's much difficult to keep on pushing for another model of civil society. And actually, it's not concerning only China, but we can see the same trends in, for example, Russia or India or Turkey, and the fact that actually the international community is doing very little against that. So there is less support from the outside. At the same time, I think the current measure against civil society in China is also very detrimental to the CCP itself. And to some extent, the central government needs some combative organization to help it implement a few of its policy, especially in the environmental field. So the central government itself needs like some kind of combative civil society. So all these dynamics are so contradictory that eventually I'm not so pessimistic. I'm quite optimistic that this attempt to format and to unify civil society in China won't completely succeed.
Thank you. Dr. Taylor, what about the economic transition that China is currently undergoing? What kind of impact would that have on workers?
Well, using the same idea of the dialectical problem, moving to a more domestic economy, it obviously insulates China from the global economic shocks a little more, and that's better for keeping growth for wages. But it also hits the problem that it becomes more dependent on local labor, and Chinese capital may be, as wages go up, even greater encouraged to move overseas, which leads to unemployment problems. So it has to build a sort of social contract with labor in some form, whilst not allowing it to democratize. And when I'm talking about democratizing, I'm talking about participation in workplaces, which is what trade unions usually do. And they have the advantage for the employers that they tend to pacify conflicts. But that's extremely dangerous for the party because it creates a whole set of alternative political groupings.
Thank you. I think there will be a lot of questions from the floor. So may I ask the microphones be circulated? Questions for our panelists. We haven't talked about Hong Kong specifically, but feel free to ask about that. Gentleman in the front first. And if you could ask Before asking a question, or after you ask your question, just give us your name and your affiliation. Thank you. You can have my microphone.
Michael Kurtz, I'm with Raise Capital, a hedge fund in Hong Kong. I wanted to, maybe if I could, by way of framing my question, challenge Dr. Kapistan's assertion that China is simply looking to maintain stability in its external relations after the Congress. I would argue that the One Belt, One Road initiative itself is in some sense a massive challenge to the existing international framework in Southeast Asia and Central Asia, for example. And secondly, the whole issue of the South China Sea and China's sort of creeping, incremental attempts to assert its sovereignty or quasi-sovereignty in that area, both are fundamentally non-stable agendas, right? And so the question, I guess, is if they really do want to maintain stability, how do they reconcile that with what seem to be some fairly aggressive, longer-term international agenda items? And finally, if you could just incorporate into your answer, whether it be you or perhaps Willie, the specific issue of Taiwan and whether or not Xi Jinping, styling himself as he does as sort of this deliverer of China's greatness and with the power that he's collected around himself, do you think that given his multi-year sort of plan to stay in office, whether or not some sort of a solution to the long-term problem of Taiwan might be part of his thought process as well? Thanks.
Okay, that was about 4 questions. First one was what? And then Willie, you can take time.
It's really just 2 questions.
Two and a half.
How do you, 2 questions. One is, how do you reconcile the desire for stability externally with their agenda? Number 2 is, what about Taiwan?
Okay. No, I mentioned stability in the Korean Peninsula and with the U.S. It's clear that China is changing the game. I mean, there's been on an assertive strategy for quite a number of years, and that's going to continue. It's kind of maintaining stability with Chinese characteristics, I would say. It means that you empower yourself, you change the rules of the game around, and you change the international norms in an incremental manner or directly in creating new institutions like the AIB, and the Belt and Road Initiative is part of that. Now they're doing it in a peaceful way, without, and this applies to some degree to the South China Sea, even if the Chinese strategy has included a militarization of the China Sea, but they haven't, apart from the Scarborough Shoal, which they started to occupy in 2012, they haven't changed the status quo on the water. What they've done, they have changed the status quo, but they haven't challenged the possession of the land features occupied by the other claimants, and I don't think they will, because they don't need to. They can dominate the South China Sea, and in a sense they've been a game changer. They can dominate the South China Sea, but the number of ships, number of military facilities, number of aircraft flying there, without having to change the occupation, the current status of the occupation of the islets or shoals in the South China Sea. Now Taiwan, Xi Jinping has announced a number of, within the party, a number of pretty ambitious objectives that the reunification should take place maybe, well, if not by 2021, at least before 2049, the 100th anniversary of the PRC. That's the slogan. Whether they will be able to do it is another story. What I can see is Taiwan has been isolated, ignored by China, but trade interactions are going on. Taiwan can survive as a de facto entity, de facto nation state, without for a long time to go, unless Xi Jinping decided to go to war against Taiwan, which I don't see he will, because he has other priorities. So yes, Taiwan is a weaker position. China has the means to put more military pressure on Taiwan, but the risks attached to any military adventure will remain pretty high. As you know, the U.S. is still very much linked to Taiwan, to the region, by a number of treaty alliances, and even if there are some uncertainties about what the Trump administration is going to do in the coming years, including in the Korean Peninsula, because there are some obvious differences of view within the administration itself, I don't think they will, abandon Taiwan overnight. I think there's still a lot of military cooperation going on with Taiwan, and they will carry on, I think, in the coming years. So yes, it's pressure is there, ostracization is there, but I don't see that being enough for changing the equation in the Taiwan Strait.
Well, could I add just briefly, just providing some footnotes to what my good friend was saying. And we are here release the first state secret, okay, for this evening. And that is, Xi Jinping is not an intellectual. He is the least well-educated Chinese leader since Deng Xiaoping. He did not even formally finish high school. He doesn't have much interest in reform, either economic or political. His major top priority is to maintain the Communist Party as what he calls the perennial ruling party of China. But he does have an interest in foreign affairs, particularly the projection of China's hard and soft power. And the only really original idea coming from Xi Jinping is the Belt and Road Initiative. This is despite the fact that Xi Jinping thought would be likely enshrined in the party constitution, thus putting him on par with Mao Zedong as China's two most important philosopher kings, whatever you might define it. However, it is important to note that with his power more enhanced, and particularly with tighter control over the military, I don't have time to discuss the recent changes at the PLA's top echelons, but we could discuss this later. There is no doubt that he would devote more budget, more attention to global power projection, more hard power projection than soft power projection. The Belt and Road Initiative, of course, is just, well, he initiated that in 2013, is a multi-decade project, intercontinental infrastructure project, so it's a bit early to judge. But as I mentioned earlier, the Belt and Road decision-making process was totally non-transparent. As far as I know, Li Keqiang and many of Li Keqiang's experts in the State Council were opposed to it. And most of my Chinese friends who are economists, engineers, and so forth, they are also opposed to it. But the fact remains that, of course, with the Beijing's 120% to 200% control over the internet and the media, opposition voices have been scrubbed clean. But the viability of the One Belt, One Road, or Belt and Road Initiative is extremely dubious. According to the McKinsey consultancy company, China needs $2 to $3 trillion US to basically improve infrastructure in Asia and Africa. And in equivalent currency terms, that is 12 times what the US spent on the Marshall Plan to resuscitate the European economy after World War II. At this stage, the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, which Xi Jinping created basically to surface the Belt and Road strategy, has a capital, they have assets of 100 billion US only. The Silk Road Fund, which Xi Jinping also set up, is worth 40 billion US, even though last year he topped it up by adding 15 billion US dollars. But I can tell you, and this is very clear, if you have studied the Belt and Road so far, most of the eye-catching projects in Pakistan, in Myanmar, in Sri Lanka, in Bangladesh, most of these are actually much more ODA, overseas development aid projects, rather than what Xi Jinping describes as win-win 50-50 joint ventures with countries affected. Well, I also would like to draw attention to what our leader Carrie Lam said a few days ago. Well, Carrie Lam said well, she had been to the UK, to Singapore, to Myanmar, to Thailand, and so forth. And she said she was enthralled by the extremely enthusiastic response which these leaders have demonstrated to the Belt and Road Initiative. Well, I can tell you frankly that this is bullshit. Nobody I know in the rich countries, the UK, EU, and so forth, have expressed interest in investing in Belt and Road intercontinental infrastructure projects, because by definition, infrastructure projects do not make money. And most infrastructure projects, you cannot even recover the initial cost. So this is a huge challenge for China.
Thank you. Second question.
Yes, my name is Pia Kaspersen. I'm a correspondent, China correspondent for Danish media. I would like to know, to get a bit back to the 19th Party Congress, that, I mean, Mr. Lam, you talked about that Xi Jinping, of course, he wants to stay in power for maybe 15 or 20 years. I just wonder, how can he actually manage to bend the rules, to change the rules? I mean, when you think about, there must be a kind of opposition. He didn't get rid of all his rebels, I guess. So what kind of signs should we look for at this coming party congress to see what could happen, and how could he manage to actually stay in power that way?
Oh, very briefly. You can see that he has been successful in just the past 2 months in filling all the top PLA positions with members of the Xi Jinping faction. That means generals who had worked with Xi Jinping in Fujian and Zhejiang province, where Xi Jinping served as a regional official from 1985 to 2007. Similarly, we can see that he will, unless we all are mistaken, that Xi Jinping will at least have a slight but significant majority over the Central Committee members. He will have a slight majority of the Politburo members and also the Politburo Standing Committee members. So I think this has emboldened Xi Jinping to stake his claim as the second most powerful leader after the Communist Party was set up in 1921.
Thank you.
You want me to challenge that? Okay. Well, down the road, we will see. I mean, within 5 years, there may be a backlash. I mean, if the collective leadership wakes up and the majority within the leadership changes, something may happen. Remember what happened to Khrushchev in 1964. I wouldn't avoid it, although he seems much more powerful and much better protected than Khrushchev was in '64. But still, he has to be careful because there may be some, down the road, some opposition. There's been some opposition to two things regarding Xi Jinping. The cult of personality. There was an attempt in the spring of last year, and it went to some kind of plateau. And the second thing is this extension, Putinization of Xi Jinping has triggered some discontent and opposition within the party. How powerful? I agree with Willy. I think he can call the shot. For how long? I don't know.
Thank you. I think it's actually already on.
Philip Bowering, freelance correspondent. Willy, is there any comparison between the Belt and Road Initiative and the Zhenghe voyages abandoned after 28 years for the sheer cost of them and the fact they had no obvious political aim in the end other than to upset a large number of neighboring countries?
Yes, very briefly. As I said, the Belt and Road Initiative is the prime example of extremely non-transparent and faulty decision-making because nobody was consulted except for Xi Jinping's inner circles. As I mentioned, Li Keqiang was very cool about this. And one of the few academics, a famous international relations expert, Xu Yanhong, hit the nail on the head when he said that the Belt and Road is a prime example of strategic overdraft. A strategic overdraft. That means China actually doesn't have the resources to project its power around the 5 continents. And we will, of course, this is still at the early stage, but the Belt and Road were those projects which are actually overseas development aid. Despite China's apparent generosity, this has arisen resentment in some of the recipient countries. The best example of is Sri Lanka. Well, out of the Sri Lanka's total foreign debt of around 65 billion US dollars, almost 10 billion came from borrowing from China. And the Chinese, for building this famous port at Harbin-Toto, lent the Sri Lankans 301 million US dollars at the, fairly indecently high rate of 6.3%. As a result of which, the Sri Lankan government is now totally bankrupt, and they have been forced to grant Beijing a 99-year lease on Harbin-Toto. So this lends credence to the theory that China is actually pursuing a kind of neo-imperialism, which was foreshadowed in the Ming Dynasty by Admiral Zheng He's ambitious trips to as far as to Kenya, Africa. Except that, of course, in the Ming Dynasty, the situation was different, even though China was a powerful empire there. So many questions are asked whether the situation of strategic overdraft might actually boomerang on the head of Xi Jinping. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm To Han Shi from MLEX. My question is for Willie Lam and other people. Willie Lam says that Li Chanshu will replace Wang Qishan as the anti-corruption czar. If that happens, what will the direction of the anti-corruption drive in China take? And what will it mean for foreign investors in China, the IBMs, the Hewlett-Packards? What risks do they have to take into account? What potential collateral damage might they have to fear?
Unlike Wang Qishan, Li Jianshu does not have so high a personal ambition. I think if Wang Qishan were indeed forced to retire, it would be because in the past 5 years, Wang Qishan has built up an extremely humongous personal empire out of the CCDI, the Central Commission for Discipline Inspection. The staff establishment of the CCDI has been expanded 3-4 times, and Wang Qishan has also created a sizable Wang Qishan faction within the party, which I don't think Xi Jinping will tolerate. Li Jianshu is a hatchet man, it's true, but he has no personal ambitions for himself. So I think the anti-corruption campaign will not be wound down. It will continue, but I think probably with less ferocity than that under Wang Qishan. But one thing will continue to be true, and that is Wang Qishan, faithful to his class origin, because he's a princeling, he's a member of the red aristocracy, and as you know, in China, membership has its privileges. Membership in the red aristocracy has its privileges, and that means Wang Qishan has never targeted a princeling unless the princeling is an enemy of Xi Jinping. So I expect this will continue under Li Jianshu. As for multinationals or private companies, or those companies who have sterling guanxi relationship with the 100 biggest clans in the Communist Party, they will be okay, because as you know, in China there is no rule of law, so it's guanxi that matters.
No, but what if a multinational IBM gets friendly with the enemy of Xi Jinping?
That's a bad choice. No, I would add to that beyond the personality that I don't know whether Li Jianshu is going to take over, but one thing is, I think Xi Jinping and his team will have to think about is to sort of slow down the anti-corruption campaign in order to sort of reactivate the reforms. For the reason we've mentioned, outside of Beijing, a lot of bureaucrats don't listen to Xi Jinping. They sit on their hands because they don't want to move, because if they start taking initiative, they're going to be caught and may get into trouble, like what happened to Su Zhencai in Chongqing. So that's why there is a tension, which is well known, between the anti-corruption campaign and the willingness to introduce more economic reforms. Now, and that's may very well be the priority of the incoming leadership after the 19th Party Congress, which will be to concentrate on the economy and the reforms, while I think they will continue to merge SOEs to create bigger state-owned groups, but at the same time they know very well, and we've seen the sign of that, that the economic growth will be mainly stimulated not by the state sector, by the private sector. So they will need to provide more support to the private sector as well. And so that will be I think the priority of the leadership rather than the anti-corruption campaign. I think the anti-corruption campaign, I don't know whether we will agree on that, has achieved a number of goals, not so much in terms of catching big tigers. This is well known, but catching a number of flies at the grassroots level, which have given a hard time to quite a number of economic actors. In other words, I think what has, people doing business with China may have witnessed that, is you see less petty corruption than before. And that's one of the achievements of this anti-corruption campaign, which, by the way, is very popular among the middle classes in China. And they would like, it's amazing how many, how much people acclaim Xi Jinping for having taken down Su Zhencai. They all believe what the party and Xi Jinping are saying about how bad the Su Zhencai is. Well, why 5 years ago, 4 years ago, they were all praising him. So again, there is a lot of naivete among the Chinese public, but they think that Xi Jinping is doing the right thing in fighting against corruption. But again, this tension is there, and the priority will change, I think.
Thank you. Next question.
I guess should be.
Yes, Houghton Neer, member of FCC. I have a question for, especially for Professor Lam. The transfer of Mr. Zhang Xiaoming from the Hong Kong CLO to the Beijing's Hong Kong Macau Affairs Bureau. Do you think this transfer means his personal say and power over Hong Kong affairs enhanced or undermined?
Okay, very briefly. Actually, I was about to release my second state secret of the evening, but I had checked with my lawyer, so I better not do it.
Give us a flavor.
Well, the new, let's focus less on Zhang Xiaoming, who is a very controversial character. Let's focus on his successor, Wang Jimin, as the new head of the Central Liaison Office. Well, Wang Jimin worked in Xiamen and other places in Fujian for about 12 years, coinciding partially with Xi Jinping's illustrious career in Fujian from 1985 to 2002. Wang Jimin is widely considered to be a member of the Xi Jinping faction, and I think he will be more effective than Zhang Xiaoming in translating, implementing Xi Jinping's much harsher policy towards Hong Kong, because he has a direct line to the top. He might not be able to reach Xi Jinping, but he might be able to reach other senior members of the Xi Jinping faction. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is José Carlos Matias. I come from Macau Portuguese and English Press Association. My question regards the resistance to Xi Jinping's bid to stay in power for the third term. So the question for Professor Willy Lam would be, one could assume that the Tuan Pai faction of the Communist Youth League cadres has been weakened, but is it dead? What about you give 25% chance for Hu Chunhua and Shen Minar to join the Standing Committee of the Politburo? What if one of them does make it to the top echelons? Wouldn't that pave the way for the probability of one of them taking over the top post in the 2022 20th Party Congress? Thank you very much.
Sorry, very briefly. Well, to put it bluntly, I think the Communist Youth League is pretty much dead. Well, Xi Jinping used a very astonishing phrase to describe the Communist Youth League. He said that the Youth League is paralyzed from the waist down, that the Chinese budget for the Youth League has been cut by 100%, and Xi Jinping pointed out with no ambiguity that the function of the Communist Youth League as a grooming, as an incubator for talent, which began with Hu Yaobang and so forth, is finished. The Youth League is now has the same status and the functions as the Women's Federation or the All China Federation of Trade Unions and so forth. So despite the fact that Wang Yang might get into the PBSC as a second representative of the Youth League, in addition to Li Keqiang, does not spell a resurgence of Youth League influence. And if it is true that Li Keqiang stays and Wang Yang will get in, then it means Hu Zhenhua's chances have come down to zero, because Xi Jinping will never tolerate there being 3 members of the Youth League in a 7-member standing committee. So, the Youth League might have some committees which listed on the Shanghai stock market, but if I have money, I will stay away from these committees. Okay, thank you.
Can I add a few words on the Youth League, because that's an interesting transformation. I think, as you know, the party secretary of the Youth League has not been included among the delegates of the party congress. Has been excluded, so there will be a unprecedented change within the Youth League. It's a mass organization which has been detached from the masses, according to Xi Jinping himself. So now what kind of organization he wants to put together in order to relink with the masses, but in particular the young people, the youth, it's a big question mark. One of the efforts of the Youth League was to go on the web and to go on a very popular websites where the youth exchange reports, but apparently it has not been very, very successful. So they will need to create a new organization. That brings me to another problem, which is the party membership. The party membership approaches 90 million now, so you've got more communist people than German people. So at the same time, you have a lot of dormant members. A lot of people don't pay the annual fees. They don't go to meetings. So I wouldn't say it's an empty shell, but you've got party member and party members, and the real party members are the party cadres, not the members themselves. So again, I mean, Xi Jinping would like to reduce the number of members, party members, in order to make the party membership more meaningful. But that's another transformation which is going to be hard. Now, if that, I would bet on Chen Ming-er as. I think he has a political future. He did a number of things in Guizhou when he was party secretary regarding the agricultural sector, agricultural reforms, which may be imitated by other provinces in the coming years. Hu Zhenhua is on the survival mode. You remember the way Pai Ma Pi, we say in Chinese, as you say in Pai Ma Pi, he was some very obsequiously praising Xi Jinping's idea in order to save his skin, actually. He succeeded, but I don't think he has much political future. Maybe I'm wrong, but to me, he's someone of the past.
Thank you so much. I would love to continue, but I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there. We'll have to see what happens in 2 weeks, and if there are indeed any fireworks, we may have another follow-up. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. The copies of the book are available to my right. Public holiday on Thursday. Not a bad way to spend the day, but thank you so much, and hope to see you again soon.